Good morning, smart people. So my name is Brandon with Task Force Pest Control and Task Force Mold Control. And today's video is essentially going to go over what to look for when you're hiring a contractor to work in your crawl space. So I'm going to try to not discriminate too much when it comes to pest control companies in this video because, um, being honest, they kind of can be the worst ones for scams when it comes to crawl space remediations. So I guess the point of this video is for homeowners. If you're looking at this and you're saying, someone's already been in my crawl space and they found mold or they found issues, or, I think there's mold, I think there's issues, or I've seen mold or I've seen issues, what's the next step here? And I kind of want to go over a plethora of things to consider when you're hiring a contractor for this kind of work. The first thing I want to go over is pest control companies. So there are pest control companies out there who know what they're doing. There are pest control companies out there who know how to handle crawl space remediation. I'm not going to say they're all awful. Obviously, I'm primarily a pest control technician. Long before I ever got certified in mold remediation, I was a pest control technician first. I did this for a good maybe 7, 8 plus years before I ever got into mold remediation. So what I understood about it from a pest control standpoint and what I understand about it now are two completely different things. So one thing to consider is if you are going to hire a pest control company, you want to make sure they have credentials outside of their pest control. So I've come across a couple of jobs in the last couple of weeks in specific where they had a pest control company come out and remediate their mold issue, and they had no certification, no licensing or anything about mold at all except for their pest license 7D, which, so everyone understands we're all on the same page, 7D is the wood destroying organism license that pest control companies need to treat for things like termites, carpenter ants, carpenter bees, and wood destroying fungus. Keep that last one in mind, that is an important one. So these pest control companies come out and they think wood destroying fungus. So when they see mold, they don't call it mold usually. They usually look at it and say you have this fungus on your wood. And we are going to treat it with a borate treatment, and that's going to prevent that fungus from causing any more damage. There's a company in this area that's actually much more brazen than that, and they actually call themselves a mold remediation company on top of a pest control company, and they don't do anything different. They don't actually remediate the mold. And so I want to dive into that a little bit. So when a company is actually a mold remediation company, they don't just treat the mold. It's not about, if I had mold on this wall, we wouldn't just spray this wall with something and then tell you that that's good. You're fine. That's all we had to do. When it comes to mold remediation, if this wall had mold on it, we would treat it with something that's going to kill it, an antibacterial, antimicrobial something to kill the mold with. And then we're going to physically scrub that mold off that wall if we can. This is actually, even though it's wood and it's particle board wood, it's actually treated, and it has a very, very non-porous finish on it. So you might be able to get mold off of something like this. Most of the time, when you have wood in a home, it's rough wood that isn't usually treated, or if it is treated, it's pressure treated, and mold can still get inside of that because it's porous. If you poured water on it and it absorbs it, it's porous or semi-porous. So in that situation, we would still do our best, try to get that off of there. Whatever we couldn't get the mold off of, we'd have to physically remove or encapsulate. That is mold remediation. These pest control companies think they can just spray it with a borate, and that's good. And from a pest control standpoint, that is true. That is accurate. If the purpose of your treatment is to prevent the wood from getting eaten any further by the wood destroying fungus, then that does serve that purpose. But when it comes to mold remediation, you're remediating the mold itself. Killing the mold is just one step. So I oftentimes tell people if you're going to get a mold remediation company to come out or a pest control company, make sure they actually know what they're doing. Make sure they explain to you what they're going to do. Because killing the mold alone is not enough. The Environmental Protection Agency, they have a Mold 101 course on their website. And one of the first things they mention is that killing the mold isn't enough. You have to physically remove it. And the reason for that, the reason why we have to physically remove the mold is because mold itself isn't toxic to everybody. If you have a room of 100 people, maybe about 50 of them, I think it's between 50 and 60 of them, I think it's between 50 and 60%, depending on the mold type, are going to have a severe allergic reaction to mold. to specific types of mold. And the reaction types to their allergy depends on what type of mold it is, the person, how many spores they're being exposed to, how they're being exposed to those spores. Is it dermis? Is it getting on their skin? Are they breathing it in? Is it going, through their nose? Are they getting rhinitis because it attaches to the sinus walls? There's so many different ways to get mold poisoning, and there are people out there who just aren't affected by it. But regardless, because the majority of people are affected by those mold types, we can't just leave the mold there. Killing the mold is fine. That's a good first step. But you're not allergic to the fact that it's alive. You're allergic to the fact that it's there. If you have an allergy to anything else, like if you have an allergy to cats and the cat drops over dead in the corner, are you still going to have an allergic reaction if you pick the cat up to remove it? Of course you are, because you're allergic to the dander. And even though the cat is dead, and the dander might even be dead, you're still allergic to that dander. With mold, even if the spores are dead and they can't reproduce, there's still spores. They're still going around the air. It's still an allergen. You're still allergic to it. So it's not just about killing the mold itself. You have to actually get those spores, get the mold out of that environment. And then aside from that, the biggest factor when it comes to mold remediation is preventing the moisture issue that created the mold in the first place. So a lot of people come to me all the time and they tell me that I got 3 different quotes from 3 different companies and they're all over the place. This one's $2,000, this one's $5,000, this one's $15,000. What's the difference in these 3 quotes? And the difference is the scope of service, what they're going to do, what they're going to provide, and how deep into mold remediation they actually get. The first one might be a company that's going to spray it and kill it. The other one might be, the one that's $5,000 might be a company that's going to come in, spray it, kill it, and remove it, and leave. The $15,000 company might come in, treat it, remove it, treat the cause of the moisture issue, and prevent it from happening again in the future. One company might put a 10-year warranty on it. Another company might put a 20-year warranty on it. Another company might say it's a yearly basis. So there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to these kinds of remediation services and what the companies themselves are offering. And you really want to make sure you find a company that knows what they're doing. So one of the things, wholeheartedly, I recommend to everybody, if you have a company come out to remediate your mold, make sure they are certified. I say certified and not licensed because in the United States, there's only 5 states that require a license for mold remediation. As crazy as that is, it is absolutely true. I think the last time I looked up the statistic, I think 30,000 people a year in the United States die of mold poisoning, or some kind of poisoning related to mold. So you think that it'd be a lot more regulated than it is, but it's not. Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, New York. I can't remember the 5th one, but there's 5 in total that require a license. My area, we don't service any of the states that require a license, but we do still go through the same certification programs that those states require for people to get a license. So ours is through PMII. This is actually mine. This is my certified remediator mold inspector, or certified remediation mold inspector certificate. And the thing that I like about this company in particular is that it does mention at the bottom how many course hours each one of these are. In order for us to pass the entire program, it's like 114 course hours. So it's not a quick online course you go on to, you complete in an hour and call it a day. This takes weeks. If you're hitting it 8 hours a day, it still takes 2-3 weeks to get through the process that way. And as you notice behind me, I have 4 on the wall than the one that I just showed you. But essentially it's mold inspector, commercial remediator, residential remediator, and business practices. And then there's another one that's specifically for New York City. I didn't need to get it. I just got it because it was included in the package. But any company that doesn't have something like that, run. Run as far away from them as you can, because these are really easy to get. They're not expensive at all by any means if you're a company. I mean, obviously, if you're a homeowner or a DIYer, it's probably going to be a little high in the price range for you to learn how to do it yourself. But from a company standpoint, this should be standard. Any company dealing with mold remediation should have a certification course they put their techs through. Another thing that you want to make sure they have is you want to see their accord form for their insurance. And you want to call their insurance and check and make sure their insurance is correct and up to date, because a lot of contractors, especially the fly-by-night ones, will pay the first payment just to get the accord form and then never make another payment. So their accord form is still here. They can still show it to you and say they have insurance, but they might not actually have insurance. So aside from those things, some other key things you want to keep in mind when you're hiring a contractor to work in your crawl space, attic, whatever your mold remediation space could be. You want to make sure that they have a very, very detailed list of everything they're going to do from start to finish. So I actually don't have a copy of mine. I probably should have printed one out. But for us, we have forms that we send our customers that have line items that go over each individual thing we're going to do, the cost of that thing, and it helps explain what you're paying for. So instead of just writing down on a ticket, mold treatment, which I have actually seen done, instead of just writing mold treatment on a piece of paper and then us both signing it, it actually goes over, we're going to put up a containment barrier. That's a very important one you want to make sure your mold remediation company is talking about doing. So I guess to fill people in, the containment barrier is essentially a plastic wall, plastic bubble, more or less, that we put up throughout the wall. Think the movie E.T. when they quarantine the house. You want to make sure that the mold spores of all the stuff you're removing, all the drywall, insulation, old wood material, any of that stuff that you're pulling down is going to spread plumes of mold spores every time you touch it. So we want to make sure those spores aren't spreading to other non-infected materials. So if you have a crawl space and your crawl space access is in your house, some people have the little hatch door in their pantry or something. We want to make sure that we're not getting those mold spores throughout the rest of your house so that it's not contaminating the rest of your house. All it takes is 1 or 2 mold spores and then they can just colonize. They find a substrate, which is something that they use for food. That could be drywall. That could be wood. That could be just about anything, really, that mold can eat to grow on. And once they find that and then a water source and then the temperature gets low enough, it's a recipe for an awful mold situation. So you want to make sure the containment wall is one of the things we're mentioning that they're going to do. You want to make sure that they are physically removing the mold and that they are preventing the issue from happening in the future. Sometimes it can be something as stupid as your gutters are too full, they need to be cleaned out because the water, instead of coming down into the gutter system like it's supposed to, is just coming straight off the edge and putting a water curtain against the perimeter of your house, and that water goes right back into your foundation. It could be something like that. It could be that your crawl space walls aren't sealed. They might need to be sealed. It could be that your crawl space needs to be encapsulated, which requires putting very thick plastic on the entire floor of the crawl space, bringing it up the walls, or putting foam board on the walls or spray foam and then putting the vaporware up over that as well to prevent moisture from coming into your crawl space at all. And then obviously a dehumidifier, maybe a sump pump or something of that nature, so that you can ensure that the moisture, any moisture that does get in there, is going to be taken care of instead of just attaching to your walls and your insulation. The other really big one that I've seen is you want to make sure that the company is going to remove any and all insulation if you have any mold issues in that area. People will say all the time that fiberglass insulation in specific can't grow mold, and that's absolutely not true. Fiberglass is a good insulator because inside of each layer of glass there's air pockets. Those air pockets are what add that R value to that insulation. And those air pockets can absorb all kinds of substrates. Things like just dust particles that float around in the air in your crawl space. Water can actually fall in there and get stuck inside those air pockets. And once your mold spores spread to those air pockets, it can grow on that fiberglass insulation. It might not be able to eat the fiberglass as a food source, but the batted paper on the back of it is a perfect food source. The subfloor that it's covering is a perfect food source. So you can look up pictures, just go to Google and type in batted fiberglass mold, and you'll find hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of fiberglass insulation that's covered in mold. I don't have the certification up on this wall. I'm actually working on that. But some of my other certifications are around insulation and specific. So I am actually NAIMA certified to do batted, craft faced insulation with fiberglass and mineral wool. And that course is another course that I had to take online that I think it was 10 credit hours or something like that. But part of that is knowing the strengths and limitations of different types of insulation materials. So I tell people all the time, anyone who tells you that fiberglass insulation cannot be a substrate for mold does not know what they're talking about. Because even the people who make the insulation will tell you that mold can grow in the fiberglass and on the fiberglass. It just can't use it as a food source. But it can use anything that it traps inside and the paper as a food source. The other, I guess, really last thing to go over when it comes to a contractor is you want to kind of be wary of price as well. This one isn't as important as the rest, but everyone always wants the cheapest option. And I wish that this was a world where the cheapest option would work every time. But the fact of the matter is that most of the time, if you hire the cheapest contractor, you're going to have a bad day. So last year, through Consumer Reports, when it comes to contracting jobs, of all the complaints, all the Consumer Reports that were given for contracting jobs, 80% of those complaints were from the cheapest bidder. And so if you think about that, if you have 100 complaints about contractors, 80% of those were from the cheapest bidder contract. And I don't want to knock the people who are just trying to get in the industry, who are just trying to get their prices down really low. Sometimes you do run into maybe that 20% who did really good, and they want to do good by their customers so they can build a legitimate, a good business. But the downside is you are paying for that mistake in the long run, and sometimes 10, 100-fold. Because you're going to hire a company to come in at a very cheap price to do your mold remediation. They're either not going to do it right, or they're going to skip some steps that would have required a lot more money. And then, 3-4 years down the line, you're going to have to hire another company to come in and do it right and undo everything the first company did. So now not only are you out the money that they charged you to do what they did however many years ago, now you have to pay another company to come back and to fix it, and they're going to be much more expensive. So, I mean, obviously, everything needs to be done right the first time. That's our motto. That's what we live by at Task Force Pest Control and Mold Control. Regardless of what we do it right. If I have to tell a customer, look, I'm sorry, but we can't do this job for anything less than this price, and then the customer understands, so that's fine, I can't afford that. We do have financing options, and if that's not an option for them, then we can't do the job. I will never allow my team to do a job that's substandard. And I would hope that if you're a homeowner, realizing that your home is your largest investment, this is the backbone of your entire life. It really is. Any financial decision you make in your entire life, nothing is as big as the home that you own. This is hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars that you've invested into this place. And devaluing your house is devaluing your assets. And so it really pays off in the long run to have a company come out and do it right, even if they are the most expensive, even if they're maybe the middle rung. But I always recommend getting 3 quotes, at least if you can. If not, if it's a very serious issue, I recommend trying to get on it as soon as possible. But I recommend getting 3 quotes, reading through their quotes, seeing what they're all about, what they're going to offer, what they're not going to offer, and then taking it from there. But with that said, again, my name is Brandon with Task Force Pest Control and Mold Control, and this is just a quick little video. Hopefully it helped you guys out. Hopefully somebody out there now has a better understanding of what to look for and questions to ask your contractor. But with that, thank you guys. Good night.